What's happening everyone, my name is Alex and welcome back. In today's video we are checking out the latest action camera from SJCAM. So the one that I have here today, it's called the C300. This is a very tiny action camera, an action camera that you can take with you pretty much anywhere. So this has the ability to record in 4K at 30 frames per second, and we also have video stabilization at that resolution. So you can get the camera just like this. Well, it has a little back here, and with that you get a 1000 milliamp hour battery, or you can get this attachment for it. So if you do get this attachment for it, then you have the second screen, and this has a 2700 milliamp hour battery. So if you want to record for extended periods of time, of course, this will be better. All right, so we're going to start by doing a super quick unboxing, just so I can show you what comes in the box. And then we're going to split the video into 3 sections. The first section will have to do with the internal microphone. So I'm going to show you some sample recordings so you can hear how the internal microphone inside this camera captures sound. The second section will have to do the video stabilization. So we'll do a couple of things so you can see how the video stabilization works. And the last section will have to do with the video quality. So let me quickly show you what comes in the box with this camera. All right, so in the box, of course, you're gonna find the user manual. However, the camera is extremely easy to use. You're also gonna find a waterproof case for the camera. However, you can only use the waterproof case if you're using the camera like this. So when it's in the small state. Without the waterproof case, you cannot put this in water. Aside from that, you're also going to find a variety of mounts. So for example, you could mount this on a tripod, you can mount it on a wall. There are a lot of mounting possibilities there. So everything will come in the box with this camera. However, when you're using the additional parts, so the battery pack, if we can call it that, you're not going to be able to use some of those accessories, even though at the bottom of the battery pack here we do have a 1/4 inch hole. So again, you can mount it in a different way on a tripod or on any mounts. The camera itself is pretty simple. On the front here, of course, we have the lens, and depending if you have the attachment on it or not, we have one button on the front here. And of course, if you have the attachment, then we have the second screen and the second button. So these buttons are basically used to start recordings and to power on or off the camera. Everything else is done on the screen. So the touch screen, the screen is a touch screen on the attachment and on the actual camera. So you can change any settings right from that little touch screen. On the back of the camera, we have the slot for the SD card. I believe that the camera can take SD cards up to 128 gigs. I personally have a 64 gig SD card in the camera, so you can easily remove that and plug it in the computer. On one side here, we have the USB-C charging port. So if you do have the other part plugged in the camera, so the battery pack, basically you do have a USB-C port on that as well. And on the back here, I believe we have the hole for the microphone and maybe the holes for a speaker. Now, you're gonna see in the microphone test that if you are using this as a selfie camera, so if you're recording like this, so the lens is basically pointing at you, the sound quality is not great. I believe that the microphone is on the back here. So if you're using this as a selfie camera, the sound is not great. But if you're recording like this and you're talking behind the camera, the microphone picks up sound much better. And since we're talking about that, let's check out a couple of sample recordings so you can hear how the internal microphone on this camera picks up sound. And I'll have some samples in front of the camera and some behind the camera. Okay, for our next microphone test, I am recording in 4K at 30 frames per second, and I am talking behind the camera. So as I mentioned earlier, I feel that the hole for the microphone is right here on the back. So I should be talking right into that microphone. Of course, it is a bit noisy around here. There are some people talking around. It is windy, there are waves. So you may hear that aside from my voice. So yeah, this is how the microphone would capture sound if you're talking behind the camera. Alright, this is a quick microphone test with the SJCAM C300. We are currently doing 4K at 30 frames per second, and as you can see for yourself, I am outside. There is a bit of noise around me, there are a couple of dogs barking, there is some traffic around me, but overall fairly quiet. Well, there is a bit of wind as well. But I just wanted to show you how the internal microphone on the C300 would capture sound, basically if you're outdoors. So as you've heard for yourself, if you're talking in front of the camera, so if you're using the camera like this as a selfie camera or a vlogging camera, the microphone doesn't really pick up the sound that well. So I'm not sure what they were thinking when they did that, but if you're recording and talking behind the camera, then the sound is much better. So keep that in mind. Next, we're gonna move on and I'll show you some recordings so you can see how the video stabilization works on this camera. So the video stabilization is also available if you're recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. Alright, so we have our first test for video stabilization. I'm currently recording in 4K at 30 frames per second, and as I mentioned earlier, we do get video stabilization at this resolution. I am walking fairly fast, and I'm also trying to keep the camera as steady as possible. We're gonna start running for a bit, and we're gonna stop here. So this is how the video stabilization would work on this C300 if you're recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. Alright, so for our next video stabilization test, I'm gonna give you a scenario that's more like real life. So we're gonna be following my daughter. She's gonna walk, she's gonna run, and I'll basically just follow her. She's probably gonna turn right. So yeah, this is how recording in 4K at 30 frames per second would look like filmed with the SJCAM C300. Quick video stabilization test in 1080p at 30 frames per second. So I'm starting out by walking. I'm also trying to keep the camera as steady as I can. We're also gonna do a bit of running just so you can see how that works. And I'm gonna stop here. We'll pan left slowly. And I'll hold the camera still. So yeah, 1080p at 30 frames per second video stabilization. Alright, so after checking out that footage, the video stabilization is definitely better than last year's C200, but I don't think it's that mind-blowing. So if you'd be to compare this to a GoPro, of course that video stabilization is not gonna be as good, but let's keep in mind that a GoPro is about 4 times more expensive than this. So I feel that for the price, the video stabilization is good enough. And I'm happy to see that we actually get video stabilization for 4K at 30 frames per second recordings. All right, next we're gonna move on and check out some sample recordings that I've done at different resolutions, just so you get an idea of the video quality that you can get from this action camera. Alright, we have a quick video recording with the C300 recording in 4K at 30 frames per second, and I also have the video stabilization enabled as well. We're just gonna walk this way. I'm trying to keep the camera as steady as possible, but of course I am walking. So I'm gonna stop somewhere around here. We'll pan up, so kind of towards the sun in a way. So up and to the right, and this way. So this is how recording in 4K at 30 frames per second with a C300 would look like on a super sunny day, and it's not that windy either, so you shouldn't hear anything else aside from my voice. Alright, and we are moving on to a quick 1080p at 60 frames per second video. If you're recording in 1080p at 60 frames per second, you do get video stabilization on this camera as well. And you do not get video stabilization if you're recording in 1080p at 120 frames per second. So if you're hoping to like run and record in 1080p at 120, yeah, no video stabilization for that. So 1080p at 60 frames per second. And a super quick recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. But for this recording, I do have the sun right behind me. So I wanted to show you how a recording would look like under these conditions. So if I turn this way, of course, you're going to be able to see me much better. So 4K at 30 frames per second on a super sunny day. So the video quality is once again an improvement from last year's C200, but once again, if we would be to compare this to the GoPro 11 or the DJI Osmo Action 3, the video quality is not that amazing. But I feel that for the price is good enough, but again, we could always have better. Now, one thing I've noticed, so if you're recording just on the regular battery pack, so the 1000 milliamp hour battery pack, I've noticed that you can only get about 25 minutes of recording if you're recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. And if you add this on the back, you can get about an hour and a bit. So the battery life is not that amazing. Of course, you could improve that if you're recording in 1080p at 30 frames per second. If you're doing 4K at 30, of course, the battery life is not going to be great. So you could improve that by doing 1080p at 30 frames per second. You could also have the screen turn off faster than me and so on. But I was actually expecting a longer battery time, mostly considering that we have a 2700 milliamp hour battery in here. So there you have it. This is SJCAM's C300 Action Camera in a quick video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.